Hello, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's see your top stories. Prime Minister Donald Tusk calls on NATO to take Russian drone threat seriously. US President Donald Trump confirms person of interest connected to fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk is in custody. And Turkey and Armenia take major step toward normalization as special envoys met at border. First, Poland has closed all border crossings with Belarus over security concerns linked to the Russian-Belarusian Zapad 2025 drills, which began on Friday. The exercises involved tens of thousands of troops. According to Russia's defense ministry, the drills are taking place in both Russia and Belarus, as well as in the Baltic and Barents Seas. They include large-scale land maneuvers and naval drills. In response, Poland has deployed about 40,000 soldiers along its eastern border in the middle of concerns the exercises may rehearse an attack on the Swoliki corridor, which is the narrow route between Poland and Lithuania, connecting Belarus with Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, Polish media reports. Staying on Poland, the closure of the border crossings followed a major scare on Wednesday when Polish air defences, backed by NATO aircraft, shot down several Russian drones that crossed its airspace. Prime Minister Donald Tusk said 19 drones were detected, with wreckage scattered across the countryside.
Following Russian drones entering Polish airspace, Polish Prime Minister has called on NATO to take the threat seriously, while European allies pledge support and Poland strengthens cooperation with Ukraine on counter-drone defence. After a National Security Council meeting on Thursday, he insisted Russia was responsible and urged NATO not to pretend nothing happened.
We don't think Russia is behind this provocation. We know it. However, I also understand that for all those who would like some kind of normalization, stabilization, some kind of policy of understanding with Russia, this situation is very uncomfortable. Because if what happened in the Polish skies on the night of September 10th is happening, it's hard to pretend that nothing happened. I hope that none of our allies will pretend that nothing happened, because it did happen.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki spoke with US President Donald Trump. Warsaw said NATO commitments were reaffirmed, though Trump suggested the incident might have been accidental.
Could have been a mistake. But regardless, I'm not happy about anything having to do with that whole situation. But hopefully it's going to come to an end.
European leaders voiced strong support. France pledged 3 Rafale jets. Germany promised to step up NATO air policing and push for tougher EU sanctions, and Britain said it stood absolutely firm with Poland. The Netherlands and Czech Republic offered air defences, while EU Chief Kaja Kallas vowed to ramp up sanctions. Polish Prime Minister also confirmed backing from Sweden. In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Polish officers will undergo training in Ukraine on counter-drone warfare, calling the strikes a test of NATO's resolve. Russia denied responsibility, while Belarus claimed the drones may have strayed due to jamming. Warsaw rejected that, saying the threat was real and vowing to defend both its borders and NATO's eastern flank.
The UN Security Council will hold a session on Friday after the incursion of what were believed to be Russian drones into Polish airspace earlier this week. Poland requested the meeting, which comes after France and had summoned the Russian ambassador for consultations. Ross Collins has more on the story.
Well, the incursion by drones into Polish airspace has left NATO and the EU scrambling for a response. On Friday, France summoned the Russian ambassador here in Paris to the Foreign Ministry for explanations, although Moscow denied targeting Poland and said it was ready to hold consultations on the issue with the Polish Defence Ministry. However, the French president is sufficiently concerned to have authorised 3 Rafale combat jets to be sent to be based in Poland to further strengthen NATO's eastern flank. On Thursday, the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte held conversations with EU ambassadors. Both NATO and the EU are worried that they would not be able to regularly deploy multi-million-dollar combat aircraft to intercept waves of what would be cheap drones. Now, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk invoked Article 4 of the NATO treaty after the incident. That article allows for consultations to be held within the alliance and serves as a political precursor to Article 5. Now, that's the famous article which states that an attack on one NATO member state is seen as an attack on all. The EU and NATO want to step up pressure on Moscow, which on Friday began 3 days of military maneuvers inside Belarus. The armed forces exercises are seen with particular concern in Poland, Latvia and Lithuania, all three NATO members, and all three of them border Belarus. The violation of Polish airspace comes as ceasefire attempts between Russia and Ukraine stall, and the prospect of a President Putin, President Zelensky meeting begins to look ever more distant. Also on Friday, the Kremlin announced that peace negotiations with Kiev would be paused for now. Ross Cullen for A News in Paris.
US President Donald Trump has expressed certainty that authorities have found the suspect in the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated while speaking to a crowd at a campus event in Utah. Trump said the suspect is currently in custody and that the shooter's father and a pastor were involved in turning him in. The president indicated that a formal announcement is expected later on Friday, and if found guilty, prosecutors would pursue the death penalty. Staying with this story, the 31-year-old's death has sparked strong reactions across the political spectrum, with responses continuing to pour in. US President Donald Trump says he will attend the funeral later on.
Panic erupted at Utah Valley University on Wednesday, 10th September, when a single gunshot turned a public speaking event into a scene of horror. 31-year-old Charlie Kirk, a conservative commentator and one of President Donald Trump's closest allies, was struck fatally in the neck while addressing students.
Oh my God.
The Utah event was the opening night of Kirk's American Comeback Tour, a 15-campus series designed to spark debate among young Americans. At Utah Valley University, however, it became his final appearance.
Basically, I just heard a shot, and I saw him falling towards the left, so I knew he got shot on the collarbone or the neck right here, but I didn't see bleed immediately. I just saw and I heard, and we all crouched down.
It's traumatizing for the students. When I saw students running off from the campus over the bridge there, a lot of them were crying. It was traumatizing for everyone, and now the campus is closed.
Kirk was rushed from the scene as terrified spectators ducked for cover. Some even jumped into a fountain. Emergency crews and SWAT teams responded quickly.
Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity and to other political violence, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges, law enforcement officials, and everyone else who brings order to our country.
Former Presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and international leaders also condemned the attack. Charlie Kirk was a polarizing figure. On campuses and across social media, he divided opinion sharply. To supporters, he was a fearless defender of free speech, conservative values, and Donald Trump's vision for America. To critics, he was a provocateur, accused of fueling division and promoting a confrontational political agenda. Kirk rose from a suburban Chicago childhood to become founder of Turning Point USA, a conservative youth movement that reshaped campus politics and played a key role in Trump's 2024 election campaign.
Politically motivated attacks like these across the United States are shaking communities, from deadly home invasions to violent protests at the Capitol. Let's take a look at some of the most prominent acts of political violence in recent US history.
In the United States, a series of politically motivated attacks in recent years has raised concerns over growing polarization and extremism. From plots against governors to violent assaults on lawmakers, the incidents point to a troubling trend.
Earlier today, Attorney General Dana Nessel was joined by officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI to announce state and federal charges against 13 members of 2 militia groups who were preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me.
In January 2021, supporters of then-President Donald Trump stormed the US Capitol in an attempt to block the certification of the presidential election results. On 28 October 2022, Paul Pelosi, husband of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was attacked at their San Francisco home by an intruder wielding a hammer. Authorities said the suspect was politically motivated and searching for Nancy Pelosi herself. A year later, in Illinois, 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy Wadea Al-Fayoume was fatally stabbed in what police described as a hate crime. On 13 July 2024, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt during a campaign rally. In May 2025, 2 Israeli embassy staff were shot dead at the Capitol Museum in Washington, D.C. Only weeks later, Minnesota Democratic leader and former State Assembly Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were fatally shot at their home.
The UN General Assembly is set to vote later today on the New York Declaration, a resolution aimed at reviving a 2-state solution between Israel and Palestine without Hamas involvement. The text, introduced by France and Saudi Arabia, demands that Hamas must free all hostages and condemns the attacks committed by Hamas against civilians on the 7th of October. It also calls for the collective action to end the war in Gaza and to implement a lasting 2-state settlement. The vote comes ahead of a September 22nd UN summit in New York, co-chaired by Riyadh and Paris, where French President Emmanuel Macron has pledged to formally recognize a Palestinian state. Now, France is facing a wave of political unrest, with protests and blockades continuing after the Block Everything rallies drew nearly 200,000 people. The crisis comes in the middle of government instability, repeated snap elections and mounting calls for President Emmanuel Macron to resign. With tensions building ahead of fresh nationwide strikes, questions remain about the future of France's political system and its leadership. To unpack this development, I am now joined by political scientist Felipe Fernandez. Welcome, Felipe.
Hello, thank you for having me here.
Thank you. My first question is, what does the current wave of protests tell us about the mood across France?
So we understand that it is not a new thing to have this sort of movements. We had the Yellow Jackets 3 to 4 or 5 years ago, and they were at the very core, facing the same challenges that the Block Everything movement is now trying to tackle. So we do understand that this is a grassroots campaign that began on social media over the summer already. So it is very recent, it is very new, and quite impressive how much they can mobilize in such short notice. We understand that it is a movement in reaction to the government's proposed austerity measures, and we understand that the Macron government has been talking about cuts to public spending, removal of national holidays. I think it was 2 that they mentioned directly. Freeze on pensions, reducing healthcare, and even increasing the age of retirement in France. That it is, for curiosity, one of the lowest ages in the entire European Union. And this whole campaign, this whole protest campaign, really includes after the political instability that we are now witnessing in France already, and once again. So I've been reading a few articles in international journals that suggest that France is the new Italy, and that is quite true. It seems implausible that no matter who the prime minister is, no matter who Emmanuel Macron appoints to prime minister, he or she will not have long life leading government. And this really escalates quite a lot when we understand that polls for the next general elections and also polls for the next presidential election really put the Assemble coalition, Macron's party, in a very fragile position. And it seems more and more plausible that regardless the result from the next general and the next presidential elections, that Emmanuel Macron's side will not be able to form a government. So this is truly one last opportunity for Emmanuel Macron to prove his own political life, even though it seems like he is out of trumps, he is out of aces. And so mostly what the Block Everything movement is really showing is that Emmanuel Macron is just a surviving president. He is no longer head of government in the sense of someone who is able to produce laws and to tackle challenges from the country.
And do you think then, with these peaceful marches and clashes now with the police, that the government has handled these demonstrations in the best way to either calm things down or actually fuel tensions?
It is very difficult to assess that properly because the tensions are so high, the level of intensity is so high, and it has been on a growing tendency from over the past 2 to 3 years. Basically, if we want to be less benevolent, from COVID, from when the COVID pandemic started, and the way that the government handled it in a country that has a very strong cultural and political tradition of liberty of movement and so on. So right after COVID, we understood that Macron's popularity started to decrease, and its political opponents are some radical to the left, some radical to the right, are trying to go with the flow of this radical wave that it is basically flooding the political environment throughout the entire European continent. So we are far beyond the point of is the police or is the national government handling correctly or incorrectly the way that the protesters are manifesting themselves. No matter what the police and what the national government do as of now, there is no peaceful way to make sure that the Block Everything movement will calm things down, because the entire political environment in France is not calm at all. It is quite the opposite of it. And we cannot, there is no prospect of things to slowing things down the road for the next couple of months. So it is very difficult for them to handle it.
Yes, and you mentioned obviously Emmanuel Macron and his government and what they've been facing. Do you think now, we know that his approval ratings are quite low as 15% now. In your view, how much of today's unrest is tied directly to his leadership style and policies?
I think it's directly linked. Of course, Emmanuel Macron per se, as the president of France, is not the sole person to blame. We can do the blame game, and if we go to the blame game, of course, Emmanuel Macron will be one of the most responsible people for this current political environment. So we understand that for any political reason, it does not really matter is at this time if it was justifiable or not, if it was a right choice or not. We understand that Emmanuel Macron's consecutive governments try to apply a few rules that go right against the usual cultural and political environment and tradition of the French people, as I just said. And so, of course, the way that France is handling international relations, for instance, and I have said here at this channel as well that Emmanuel Macron was trying to use France's international position as a way to minimize the impact of the French internal situation, internal political situation. But at the same time, Emmanuel Macron is not being so successful at this point, and so it really mingles everything into a perfect cocktail of disapproval of Macron's style internally and externally. So when we understand this and we align it with low approving ratings and very poor results in polls for the next couple of elections. We understand that, of course, Emmanuel Macron is at the very core and is at the very heart. So the request for the president to resign, of course, he will not resign. I mean, he's at the far end of his last term already. It would not make sense for Emmanuel Macron to resign at this stage if he did not do so previously. But of course, then again, if we want to play the blame game, of course, Emmanuel Macron would be the #1 target of it.
And now France has its 5th prime minister in 2 years with the recent appointment of Sébastien Lecornu. How does this political instability affect the governance and the ability to implement reforms because of everything that's going on then?
It completely paralyzes the government possibility of reform anything whatsoever. So we have a very complicated situation in the French Parliament, where there are no absolute majorities that can allow you to govern in a proper and in a calm and serene way. So it is always depending on alliances, and these alliances are ever more strategic. So there are no longer alliances based on political principles, political values, political rules that everyone agree with, and it is able to have a conversation on the top of a common ground. So this common ground is more and more smaller, is decreasing with time. And of course, then again, there is no proper prospect of an absolute majority in the next following general elections whatsoever. So for the time being, and for the time that is approaching very rapidly at this stage, it is not expectable for the French Parliament to have a calm situation or a calm composition that will allow government to rule properly and to govern properly and to pass some reforms, no matter if these next reforms are aligned with what Emmanuel Macron desires or not, or if it goes on the opposite way. And so, regardless of this composition, there is another clear key aspect of it, and that is who will be France's next president. Will he or she be able to connect the dots? Will he or she be able to build bridges on top of a very fragmented parliament, and that is becoming very fond of political radical parties?
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your insights, Mr. Fernandez. Thank you. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a look closer at the key stories shaping the region. Now, Russia has shut down a secretive presidential directorate once charged with keeping former Soviet republics in Moscow's orbit. The closure follows a stream of leaks exposing espionage, corruption and dwindling influence. A report by The Insider reveals the scale of the operations and the money involved.
Russia's Presidential Directorate for Interregional and Cultural Ties with Foreign Countries was set up in 2005 after Ukraine's Orange Revolution. Its official aim was cultural cooperation. In practice, insiders say it was a hub for intelligence and influence missions across Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia. Leadership often came from the spy world. Early head Modest Kolarov had a background in political strategy and covert work. He was followed by figures like Nikolai Svetkov, Vladimir Chernov, Sergei Vinokurov, all linked to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR. Funding was on a massive scale. Internal papers seen by investigative outlet The Insider show hundreds of millions of dollars channeled over 2 decades. More than 100 million went to Azerbaijan alone for festivals, exhibitions, and media projects. Annual spending on Central Asia reached at least $50 million, with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan named as priority targets. The methods were equally striking. Reports list at least 136 journalists and bloggers classified as agents of influence, some marked ours or ready to cooperate. Budgets covered media outlets, youth movements, and even banquets described by staff as drinking sessions. Results were mixed at best. In Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, Military cooperation with Russia shrank sharply after 2022. Turkmenistan increased defense spending and signed new security deals beyond Moscow's reach. In Azerbaijan, where expensive events were meant to showcase partnership, relations cooled and Russian media such as Sputnik faced restrictions. By early 2025, as Russia's war in Ukraine drained resources and credibility, President Vladimir Putin ordered the directorate to be scrapped. Its tasks are now being folded into a new directorate for strategic partnership and cooperation under domestic policy chief Sergei Kirienko. Officials have 3 months to complete the handover, with key figures tied to past scandals barred from the new structure. The decision ends a 20-year experiment in covert cultural diplomacy that cost Russia hundreds of millions of dollars, delivered few allies, and exposed how the Kremlin's soft power ambitions often masked old-style espionage.
Georgia is facing mounting questions over its foreign policy direction, while its neighbors deepen ties with both Washington and Beijing. Tbilisi's growing partnership with China is drawing criticism from Western allies. It all comes against the backdrop of fresh tensions between Georgia and the EU. Our correspondent has more.
Tbilisi Mayor Kaha Kaladze has defended Georgia's deepening cooperation with China, calling it a strategic and economic necessity. He answered to critics, saying that closer ties are welcomed, noting that engagement with Beijing is a broader regional trend rather than a Georgian exception. That point is supported by recent moves from Georgia's neighbors. Both Azerbaijan and Armenia have expanded their relationships with China in recent months, while at the same time signing historic agreements in the United States. Washington has praised those steps as a progress toward regional stability, leaving some in Tbilisi asking why Georgia's outreach to China is viewed so differently. One possible answer lies on the Black Sea coast. The planned Anaklia deep-sea port is seen as strategically vital, and reports suggest a US-sanctioned Chinese company could be among the potential investors. That prospect has raised concern in Washington and Brussels, where the focus is less on trade and more on long-term security implications. This issue was even the subject of a hearing today at the US Helsinki Commission, pointedly titled "From Partner to Problem: Georgia's Anti-American Detour." The debate also comes amid wider diplomatic strain. Georgia has rejected criticism from European partners, most recently in a dispute with German ambassador in Tbilisi. Berlin defended its envoy and warned that aggressive rhetoric could damage relations, adding another layer of tension to Georgia's foreign policy landscape. Kaladze's message was clear. Georgia values its partnership with China and will continue on that path. But the country now faces the delicate task of balancing these ties with the expectations of its Western allies. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
Turkey and Armenia took a major step towards normalization as special envoys met at the Margara crossing point on Thursday, the first such encounter at border in years. Turkish envoy Sedar Kilic, received by Armenia's Ruben Rubenyan, highlighted the strategic importance of the Zangezur corridor before the meeting. He called it a gateway linking Turkey, Armenia, Central Asia and the Turkic republics. He said Yerevan had declared readiness to open the border, noting that only technical steps remain. US Senior Bureau official for European and Eurasian Affairs announced that Washington will provide $145 million in assistance to Armenia. The funding is aimed to boost Armenia's economy and regional transport links. Brendan Rahan says it's the first step toward the Trump route for peace and prosperity, a plan to link Azerbaijan, Armenia and Turkey through the Zangezur corridor. Kazakhstan plans to launch the Turgan-Herat railway line in Afghanistan by 2026 to 2027. Deputy Transport Minister Maksat Kalyak Parov announced at a government meeting. The 120-kilometre project will enable Kazakhstan to expand exports and transit to Afghanistan. It will allow access to the markets of Pakistan and India while offering Afghanistan greater trade opportunities through the Middle Corridor. A logistics company will also be established in the Herat, and fibre optic cable will be laid along the route to enhance digital infrastructure. The United Nations has launched a 4-month emergency response plan for Afghanistan worth $140 million to assist nearly 500,000 people affected by the recent devastating earthquake. Our Tamim Bahis has more on that in Kabul.
The earthquake struck Kunar, Laghman and Nangarhar provinces with a magnitude above 6, followed by 3 strong aftershocks. More than 2,200 people lost their lives and around 3,600 were injured. Over 6,700 homes were either destroyed or damaged, leaving thousands of families displaced in unsafe and makeshift shelters. Many households also lost their food supplies and now face limited access to clean water, health services and sanitation. Schools, clinics and essential infrastructure were also badly affected. The United Nations emergency plan aims to reach 457,000 people by the end of the year. Relief operations have already begun, with humanitarian organizations and local authorities delivering food, tents, blankets, warm clothing and clean water. Mobile health and nutrition teams are being deployed along with medical supplies to the worst hit areas. Humanitarian partners are focusing on the needs of vulnerable groups, including women and children, while also preparing communities in high-altitude areas for the winter season. The plan includes shelter support, water and sanitation, food assistance, protection services, education, and agriculture and livestock aid to help safeguard lives and livelihoods. The United Nations is calling for urgent international support to ensure families impacted by the earthquake receives life-saving assistance before winter sets in. Tamim Bahis reporting for A News from Kabul, Afghanistan.
Welcome back to A News. Now, Georgia and the US relations are under a new strain following a Helsinki Commission hearing in Washington titled From Partner to Problem, Georgia's Anti-American Turn. Former Georgian leaders criticized the ruling Georgian Dream Party, while US lawmakers debated the stalled Mega-Bari Act aimed at sanctioning Georgian officials. Tbilisi, meanwhile, accuses the hearing of disinformation and insists it seeks a reset with Washington. Now, to unpack this, I am joined by Dr. Vakhtang Maisaya, a political analyst from Tbilisi in Georgia. How are you?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here and joining you.
Thank you. My first question is, how would you describe the current state of US and Georgia relations?
I would just describe it like a most unstable and unfavorable from just about Georgian perspective, because I'd like to make comment, it's not a Georgian itself just had like anti-American just implications. But we have only Georgian just ruling party who also just usurped power and of course executed very anti-Western and Eurasian, pro-Eurasian, pro-Russian foreign policy stance. So in that case, I guess this Helsinki committee just hearings also indicated that of course there's a huge problems between the Georgian and incumbent Georgian government and United States Trump's administration at time of being. Even just about this Mega-Bari Act, about this special act, which if just about Senate adopted, because this Congress also adopted, and also just about and only Senate should also need its confirmation of this just about realization of this act, so-called Mega-Bari, the France, it's called France Act Mega-Bari in Georgian, into English means Friendship Act. If this act would be adopted, it means that just Trump administration will have all leverages to impose very strict sanctions, and also just impose not only economic but even political, just about quite sanctions against ruling party and Bidzina Ivanishvili itself, who is an informal ruler of today's Georgia. So nowadays, as it's known, this Megobari Act been also just somehow postponed, because about 3 senators also just waiving or just about trying to avoiding to just support this act, but they not even completely reject. That only just they only considering about whether they have to support it or not support. But it's needs time, and I guess in October at least this Megobari Act will be adopted. So it means that Trump administration will have very strict policy toward this incumbent just ruling elite of Georgia with leadership of Ivanishvili and Kobakidze. Kobakidze, like a incumbent prime minister of Georgia.
Yeah.
And Mr. Bidzina Ivanishvili, he's an informal leader of Georgia, as you are aware.
Yeah. And so the Helsinki Commission hearing, which is titled From Partner to Problem, how significant is that framing, that language that was used? And what message does that send to the people in Tbilisi?
Well, the message is very just about strict, very clear, that United States expressed a great concern about violation of the human rights, about just about that Georgia is also just a step forward to increase its relations, strategic relations, unfortunately, with Iran and Russia. Also, they also just remain some suspicious about Georgia relations with China. And, but main concerns it deals about relations with Russia, which is a more just about biggest concern. And of course, this is about clear message that the United States also just awaiting from the Georgian government, because still about this so-called strategic charter still under the way, still just about in force, which was signed up in 2009 between Georgia and United States. And of course, all just steps behaviors of this Georgian incumbent government absolutely just about were going far from these realms of the strategic charter, which also as a key document reinforcing Georgia-American strategic friendship and status correlations. It's under this just about question those relations. So this is about clear message from the just about Washington. So I would like to mention that just at the session, at the hearings, we have like there were two just about most high level just the Georgian politicians, just about the fifth president of Salome Zurabishvili and ex-defense minister Tina Hidashvili, who is nowadays a chair of one of the important and strategic human rights organizations, Civic Idea. So, and of course, all senators and also just Senator Wilson also express deep concern and deep just about, I would say, just misunderstandings about what nowadays Georgian government are doing. Because, just about, that relevantly so-called Georgian President Mikhail Kavalishvili submitted to the President of Trump some official letter, which absolutely just about being far from the diplomatic ethics and even just about political, even just, political, even just standards, I would like to mention. So I guess these also indicate that Georgian government has absolutely considering the Trump administration as like a deep state, how they just used to use this jargon, how they get to use this jargon about remaining about American administration, deep state just about institution. I know what they mean about the deep state, but well, they didn't even clarify what does mean deep state.
Yes,
I know that how deep state works in Russia. For Russia, it's clear. How it works in maybe just about Iran, but how it works in America, it's absolutely completely just about idiotic, just about praise and content.
And Dr. Vakhtang, just on that then, critics say that closer ties with Russia, China and Iran are pulling Georgia away from that western part. But do you actually think Georgia might be being treated differently from other countries in the region who have signed partnerships, for example, with Russia?
I would like to mention that Georgia also been isolated by even those countries. I would mention that when China didn't invite Georgian leadership to the victory days, and Even just Georgia also been missed opportunity even to attend about Shanghai Cooperation Organization Tianjin just about summit. So it also implicated that China also just partially ignore this Ivanishvili's and Kobakidze's government itself, one case. Even Russia just about expressed some quite suspicious toward Ivanishvili and Kobakidze just about authorities at time of being. And of course, there are some problems tackling with Turkey and Azerbaijan. So it comes out that in Georgia we have just about run a so-called Kimchanization process. I use the term Kimchanization. You know what does it mean? The North Korean isolation, just about policy, which should be just about implicated, unfortunately, to the Georgia's case at time of being.
And looking ahead,
Kimchanization is like a key provision of this policy.
Yes, and looking ahead now, what steps do you think realistically could reset or stabilize US and Georgia relations under the Trump administration?
I guess it will be just, first of all, that to restore human rights, to respect Constitution, at least, and of course to absolutely nullify the so-called Russian law, which absolutely died and killed about its freedom of speech and human rights. This is about many implications. Second, of course, to also just join these Washington just about agreements, also just foster and develop and join about Georgia's involvement in the American project, which we call West-South project, which were important from Georgia economic perspective. And of course, to increase Georgia-American relations in edges of the NATO cooperation. This is about main just steps and behaves, which also just restored Georgia-American strategic relations.
Okay, and my other question in regards to what you've just said, in regards to how are people, the public within the country is reacting to these hearings and what's going on with US and Georgia relations?
Well, the Georgian public and Georgian community, the majority of Georgian community and Georgian population is absolutely just saying yes to Georgia-American strategic partnership. Only minority, which we can see only in Georgian government, unfortunately, is a reality. Because we have like a daily, every day, we have like a protest rally, every day. It's never just even just about shock down and even just getting to the knees. It's also just increased and raised. It's just about waves, about protest rally, about just anti-Western, toward anti-Western policy of the Georgian government. And of course, the Georgian population and Georgian public also just accept it and also just also share those concerns, which was also been delivered by the American senators in ages of the hearing.
I see. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and for your insights. They've been very insightful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maisanya. Thank you. Well, you're up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.